Vitellius, the most humiliating execution in Roman history. Picture this: the most powerful man in the world, dragged half-naked through the streets of Rome, tortured, humiliated, and killed like a common criminal. His head mounted on a spear, paraded through the very forum where he once ruled as emperor. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Vitellius, and arguably the most brutal and humiliating execution in all of Roman history. I'm your host, and welcome back to Chapters in History, where we dive deep into the darkest and most fascinating moments of the past. If you're new here and love untold historical stories like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Today we're exploring how an emperor who ruled the greatest empire on earth met an end so savage, so degrading, that it shocked even the violence-hardened Romans themselves. Chapter 1: The Rise of a Doomed Emperor. To understand the horror of Vitellius's end, we need to go back to the beginning of 69 AD, a year Romans would remember as the Cali, year of the four emperors. The empire was bleeding. Emperor Nero had died the previous year, and the throne had become a prize fought over by ambitious generals across the vast Roman territories. Aulus Vitellius wasn't supposed to be emperor. He was a career politician, known more for his massive appetite and love of luxury than his military prowess. Standing over 6 feet tall, a giant for ancient times, with a protruding belly and a face marked by years of indulgence, Vitellius looked more like a wealthy merchant than a warrior emperor. But in January of 69 AD, the legions of Germania Superior and Germania Inferior declared him emperor. Why? Not because they believed in his leadership, but because they despised the current emperor, Galba, who had refused to pay them their promised bonuses. Vitellius represented change, and more importantly, he represented money. The path to Rome was paved with blood. Vitellius's forces, led by his generals Caecina and Valens, marched south like a plague of locusts. They didn't just defeat armies, they devastated entire regions. Cities that resisted were burned. Citizens were enslaved or slaughtered. This wasn't conquest, it was destruction. When they finally defeated Emperor Otho at the Battle of Bedriacum in April, Vitellius had achieved the impossible. He was now master of the Roman world. But his triumph would be shorter than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 2: The Emperor of Excess. Vitellius entered Rome in July 69 AD, not as a conquering hero, but as a symbol of everything wrong with imperial power. His first acts as emperor revealed a man completely unprepared for leadership and utterly corrupted by power. While Romans starved, Vitellius gorged himself. Ancient sources describe banquets that lasted from noon until midnight, featuring dishes so exotic and expensive that they bankrupted the imperial treasury. We're talking about meals that included flamingo tongues, peacock brains, and fish transported alive from distant seas. One feast reportedly cost the equivalent of millions in today's currency. But it wasn't just the food. Vitellius surrounded himself with gladiators, actors, and chariot drivers, the lowest classes of Roman society. He promoted his drinking companions to high political offices and gave military commands to men whose only qualification was their ability to entertain him at dinner parties. The Roman elite watched in horror as their emperor transformed the imperial palace into what one historian called a den of gluttons and drunkards. Vitellius would stumble through official ceremonies, sometimes so intoxicated he could barely speak. He once vomited during a religious sacrifice, an act so sacrilegious that many Romans saw it as a sign from the gods themselves. Meanwhile, the empire's borders remained undefended, taxes went uncollected, and civil administration ground to a halt. Vitellius was too busy eating to govern and too drunk to care. But perhaps most damning of all, he showed shocking disrespect to the memory of previous emperors. He refused to complete the burial rites for Otho, his predecessor, leaving the former emperor's body to rot. This wasn't just political, it was spiritual vandalism that horrified Roman religious sensibilities. Chapter 3: The Rise of Vespasian. While Vitellius feasted in Rome, another general was watching from the eastern provinces. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, Vespasian was everything Vitellius was not: disciplined, experienced, and respected by his troops. He had been fighting the Jewish rebellion in Judea, proving himself as both a commander and an administrator. In July 69 AD, the same month Vitellius entered Rome, the legions of Egypt and Judea declared Vespasian emperor. Unlike the drunken revelries that marked Vitellius's rise, Vespasian's proclamation was met with systematic planning and careful preparation. Vespasian had several crucial advantages. First, he controlled Egypt, Rome's breadbasket, meaning he could starve the capital into submission. Second, he had the respect of the Eastern legions, battle-hardened troops who had proven themselves in the brutal Judean campaign. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he had competent lieutenants, including his own son Titus and the experienced general Antonius Primus. News of the Eastern Rebellion reached Rome in late summer, but Vitellius initially dismissed it as a minor uprising. He was too busy planning his next banquet to take seriously the reports of legions marching west. This would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. By October, Vespasian's forces had crossed the Adriatic and were advancing through northern Italy. The same route that had brought Vitellius to power was now bringing his doom. The Vitellian legions, demoralized by months of inactivity and disgusted by their emperor's behavior, began defecting in massive numbers. Chapter 4. The Collapse. The end came with shocking speed. On October 24, 69 AD, Vespasian's forces won a decisive victory at the Second Battle of Bedriacum, the same location where Vitellius had triumphed just months earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. What the gods gave, the gods could take away. As news of the defeat reached Rome, panic spread through the city. Vitellius, finally sobering up to the reality of his situation, attempted a desperate gambit. He tried to abdicate, offering to step down peacefully in exchange for safe passage out of the city. For a brief moment, it seemed like the crisis might end without further bloodshed, but Vitellius's own supporters wouldn't let him quit. The Praetorian Guard, the imperial bodyguards who had grown rich under his reign of corruption, forced him back into the palace at sore point. They knew that Vespasian's victory would mean their own destruction, so they were determined to fight to the bitter end. This decision sealed everyone's fate. When Vitellius tried to negotiate, he was branded a coward. When he tried to fight, he was revealed as incompetent. He had become a prisoner in his own palace, trapped between enemies outside the walls and allies who would kill him if he tried to surrender. On December 20th, Vespasian's advance guard, led by Antonius Primus, reached the outskirts of Rome. The city's defenses crumbled almost immediately. Vitellius's supporters, realizing the situation was hopeless, began abandoning him en masse. By nightfall, enemy soldiers were fighting in the Roman Forum itself. Vitellius spent his final night as emperor hiding in the palace, listening to the sounds of battle growing closer and closer. Ancient sources describe him wandering the corridors like a ghost, sometimes weeping, sometimes raging, but always knowing that dawn would bring either death or something worse. Chapter 5. The most humiliating execution. What happened next shocked even the Romans, who were no strangers to political violence. When Vespasian's soldiers finally breached the palace on the morning of December 20th, they didn't simply kill Vitellius. They decided to make an example of him that would be remembered for centuries. They dragged the emperor from his hiding place. Sources suggest he was found cowering in a servant's quarters, disguised in filthy clothes. The man who had once commanded legions was pulled through the palace corridors like a common criminal. But this was only the beginning. The soldiers bound Vitellius's hands behind his back and placed a noose around his neck, not to kill him, but to humiliate him. They then forced him to walk through the streets of Rome, naked from the waist up, as crowds gathered to witness the fall of their former emperor. But the true horror was what the crowd did to him. These were the same Romans who had cheered his triumphal entry just 5 months earlier. Now they spat on him, threw garbage and human waste, and screamed curses. Some grabbed daggers and inflicted small cuts, not to kill but to torture. Children threw stones. Women emptied chamber pots from upper windows. The procession moved deliberately slowly through the city, ensuring that every Roman could witness their former emperor's degradation. Soldiers forced Vitellius to look up at the statues and monuments of previous emperors, mocking him with questions about how he compared to his predecessors. At the Forum Romanum, the very heart of Roman political life, they forced him to his knees. Here, where he had once given speeches as emperor, Vitellius was made to beg for his life in front of thousands of spectators. The crowd's response was not mercy, but laughter. The actual execution was almost an afterthought. A soldier's sword ended Vitellius's life with a single thrust, but even in death, the humiliation continued. His body was dragged by hooks to the Tiber River and thrown in like refuse. His head was mounted on a spear and paraded through the city for days. Chapter 6: The Aftermath and Legacy. The execution of Vitellius marked the end of the year of 4 emperors and the beginning of the Flavian dynasty under Vespasian. But more than that, it established a new precedent for how Rome would treat failed emperors. Never before had an emperor been subjected to such public humiliation before death. The brutality served a purpose beyond mere revenge. Vespasian's supporters wanted to send a clear message. This is what happens to those who abuse imperial power. The spectacle was designed to legitimize the new regime by completely destroying the dignity of the old one. But the execution also revealed something darker about Roman society. The same people who had accepted Vitellius's rule, who had participated in his corrupt system, who had benefited from his largesse, turned on him with shocking savagery the moment he fell. It was a reminder that in Rome, power was everything, and without it, even an emperor was nothing. Modern historians debate whether Vitellius deserved such a fate. While he was undoubtedly a terrible emperor, corrupt, incompetent, and destructive, may argue that his punishment exceeded his crimes. Others suggest that his execution was necessary to break the cycle of civil war that had been tearing the empire apart. What's undeniable is that Vitellius's death became a cautionary tale that echoed through the centuries. Future emperors would remember his fate and understand that ultimate power came with ultimate risk. Cross the wrong people, lose the support of the legions, or simply fail too spectacularly, and you might find yourself dragged naked through the streets of the very city you once ruled. The most humiliating execution in Roman history wasn't just the end of one man's life, it was a brutal lesson in the true nature of power, loyalty, and the fickleness of the Roman mob. Final chapter. And that's the horrifying true story of how Emperor Vitellius went from ruling the world to becoming a cautionary tale in less than 8 months. His execution remains one of the most shocking examples of how quickly fortune could turn in ancient Rome. What do you think? Was Vitellius's punishment justified, or did it go too far? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's darkest moments, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories from the past. Next week, we'll be exploring another brutal chapter in Roman history that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the empire. Until then, keep exploring history's chapters with me. Thanks for watching.